AOC. What? She's kind of fun in a silly but earnest, wrong but adorable way. She's like your daughter when she comes back from her first year at Brown, full of half-baked, half opinions, in need of some gentle, patient deprogramming. But people have to realize new faces doesn't mean new ideas. Drives me crazy. AOC has never introduced a fresh idea.
More and more I'm seeing people on the right offering like some praise for her, like, oh, don't count out AOC. And she's a fighter because she seems to have some of the same base as Trump, people who want an outsider. Wake up, people. Wake up. She was 100% on the side of Jordan Neely here, throwing out all the racism accusations and all that her woke identity politics playbook. She is no friend to reason. So stop, okay? Just stop. The praise of AOC has to end from anybody who wants justice, wants reason, wants sanity to prevail, and isn't on the side of woke identity politics.
To understand modern American politics, you have to understand that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is more than just a politician. She is a cultural dividing line, a political Rorschach test where one person sees a visionary leader and another sees a naive ideologue. She is the embodiment of a generational earthquake that is rattling the very foundations of our political institutions. Her every action, every speech, every social media post seems to split the public along a profound and often angry generational fissure. For millions of young people, she is a hero, the authentic voice of their anxieties and their aspirations. But for many older Americans, she is a figure of utter bewilderment, a source of frustration and fear, whose ideas seem radical and whose style seems deeply unserious. This script is not another simple critique of her policies. It is an investigation into the divide itself. We will seek to answer the fundamental question: why does AOC create this profound generational split? Is she merely the voice of a new generation, or is she the leader of a declaration of war against the old one?
Let's check in on AOC and see what she has to say.
Any quick reaction on what's going on with Elon Musk and President Trump on Twitter right now?
Oh, man, the girls are fighting, aren't they? I think this breakup we've been seeing a long time coming, but we'll see what the impacts are of it legislatively.
Okay. You're so cool referring to them as the girls. She's above it all, Ben. That's what she's trying to telegraph. You see, she's the adult in the room, the one out there who does a preacher accent, and she leans into her fake Latina accent, and she's the adult in the room.
To begin to understand the generational divide that AOC personifies, we must first analyze the very language she speaks. Her communication style represents a radical break from the traditions of American politics. For decades, the language of politicians has been a carefully constructed, formal, and often sterile dialect. It is a language of press releases vetted by committees, of teleprompter speeches polished to a high sheen, and of guarded, evasive answers given in formal interviews. It is a language designed to minimize risk, project authority, and maintain a professional distance from the public. AOC has taken a sledgehammer to this entire tradition. She speaks the native tongue of the digital age, the language of social media.
Drives me crazy. AOC has never introduced a fresh idea or issue in her life. The reason why she gets along with Bernie is because she's like an 80-year-old leftist in a used bookstore. I mean, she may look fresh, but she's as stale as an abandoned futon on the street. It's like, I listen to her, I go, I heard that at Berkeley in 1983.
Her primary mode of communication is not the Sunday morning talk show, but the spontaneous, unfiltered Instagram live session, often conducted from her own kitchen while she cooks dinner. She speaks directly to her followers in a casual, conversational tone, answering their questions in real time. She uses memes, she claps back at critics on Twitter with witty, sarcastic retorts, and she is unafraid to be emotionally vulnerable, sharing her frustrations, her anger, and even her moments of doubt. This style builds an almost unprecedented sense of authenticity and intimacy with her followers, particularly younger ones. They don't see her as a distant, lofty politician. They see her as one of them, a peer who just happens to work in Congress. However, this same style is often perceived by an older establishment as deeply unprofessional, undignified, and even reckless. To those accustomed to the gravitas and formality of traditional politics, her casual approach can look like a lack of seriousness. Her emotional vulnerability can be mistaken for instability. Her use of social media can be seen as trivial. This fundamental clash in communication styles is the first and most visible fault line in the generational earthquake she represents.
You know, it's no surprise. Who would go see a movie that's the opposite of entertaining? There's nothing entertaining about that. Michael Moore's colonoscopy is more entertaining than that because there's probably more twists. But it does show you how great it is to be a progressive in a liberal biased culture. She really doesn't do her job, right? She makes movies, she goes to galas, she sits for glossy butt-kissing interviews in GQ and other women's mags. Once you get over the fact that you're hollow inside, it's not a bad life.
Beyond the language she uses, the very issues she champions represent the priorities of a new and deeply anxious generation. Her signature policy platforms are not just abstract political ideas. They are direct, radical answers to the core anxieties of millennials and Gen Z. Consider her flagship proposal, the Green New Deal. For many older voters who grew up in an era of cheap energy and perceived endless resources, it can look like a radical, impossibly expensive fantasy. But for a generation that has grown up under the constant, looming shadow of climate change, seeing images of wildfires, superstorms, and melting ice caps their entire lives, radical action doesn't seem like a choice. It seems like a necessity for survival. The Green New Deal, with its call for a complete transformation of the economy, is a direct reflection of their existential fear.
So their problem is, and the reason why they don't have any ideas is they operate on half opinions. Like, what if we get rid of cash bail? Oh, let's do it. What happens? You have repeat criminals wreaking havoc. What if we have sanctuary cities? Hey, let's do it. What happens? You have rapists and killers, finding sanctuary, safe haven. What if we give trans rights that we don't have? Well, you just ruin women's sports, you ruin safe spaces, you make kids' lives hell, but you don't think about, they never think about what their ideas incentivize. That would be nice. So where are their ideas gonna come from? Trump.
Similarly, her passionate calls for universal health care and massive student debt forgiveness speak to the economic precarity that defines her generation. Millennials and Gen Z are the first generations in modern American history who are projected to be worse off financially than their parents. They are burdened by crippling student loan debt, facing an impossibly expensive housing market, and navigating a gig economy that offers little stability. From their perspective, they have inherited a broken system, a social contract that was written by and for the baby boomer generation, and which no longer works for them. When AOC advocates for these massive social programs, she is not just pushing a political ideology, she is giving voice to the economic desperation of her peers. This stands in stark contrast to the priorities of many older voters, which are often focused on fiscal conservatism, lower taxes, and protecting the economic systems from which they have benefited. This isn't just a disagreement over policy, it's a fundamental clash between the anxieties of the young and the priorities of the old.
I read a little bit of the New York Times review, and Teo, he thinks that the hopelessness of the movie makes it a hard sell for people who would go see the movie and also for voters to change their minds about climate change. But they said for AOC that she offers the best on-screen antidote to despair because she's funny, a canny political strategy. But they don't like it if conservatives are funny. Yeah. Right? It's only
that's
helpful
mean.
There. Right?
If a conservative is funny, that's mean. You're
right.
mean. You're being mean.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's political project is not just about proposing new ideas. It is also a direct and often confrontational challenge to the authority of the generations that have been in power. This is the OK Boomer offensive, a battle being waged against the old guard of both political parties. Her style is not one of respectful, incremental change. It is one of impatient, righteous disruption. She has not been afraid to clash publicly with the senior leadership of her own Democratic Party. Her early friction with former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was well documented, a symbolic struggle between the new, radical wing of the party and its old, established center.
Let's fix what you broke situation.
This performance from AOC, who decided to go to the Bronx and pretend she was Cardi B.
Are you ready to take this borough back? Are you ready to win on this back?
You're not Cardi, you're not Muhammad Ali, you're a congressional Kardashian.
AOC and her allies often frame their political battle not just as a fight against Republicans, but as a fight against a complacent establishment, run by older politicians who they believe have failed to address the country's most pressing crises, from climate change to economic inequality. Her rhetoric often carries an implicit and sometimes explicit accusation that the older generations have mismanaged the country, sold out the future for their own short-term gain, and are now standing in the way of the solutions needed to fix the problems they created. This confrontational approach is thrilling to her young supporters, who see her as a warrior fighting on their behalf. But it is deeply alienating to many older Americans, who view it as a profound lack of respect for experience, for institutions, and for the very people who built the country they now inhabit. Her politics are not just about policy, they are about power, and her rise represents a direct challenge to the generation that has held it for decades.
This is the reason why you can't even compromise with temporary solutions. Because even if you give a temporary solution to a lefty, they're going to make it permanent. There's no such thing as temporary, whether it was mail-in ballots, or it's the moratorium. You give them and they go, oh, yeah, sure, and we'll get back to normal. No, they won't. Moratorium, they don't even know what that means. And we don't actually, I have to say, we don't talk about her at all. We talk about the stories, and we're always very, very respectful. I think she's incredibly talented, but she hasn't lived enough to be that arrogant in her wisdom.
To fully understand her role, we must place her within a specific political lineage to see how the torch of radical politics is being passed. AOC's rise was not born in a vacuum. It was made possible by the groundwork laid by Senator Bernie Sanders. Sanders, a man in his 80s, served as the crucial and unlikely bridge between old-school 20th century democratic socialism and the new 21st century progressive movement. His presidential campaigns in 2016 and 2020 mobilized millions of young people, introducing them to a political vocabulary that had long been considered taboo in mainstream American politics. He gave them a framework for their frustrations.
We got just this week, last week before the inauguration, AOC saying, I'm not going to the inauguration because I don't support rapists. That is a defamatory statement. She didn't make clear that's opinion. She said it as though it were a matter of fact. It isn't. And I really think he should give some serious thought to suing her. She wasn't on the legislative floor. She was sitting in her apartment doing a little Instagram. You can't get away with that. A term like he's a rapist or he's committing potential treason in working with the Russians, like, news organizations have just, and politicians for that matter, given up all the guardrails that we used to observe.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez can be seen as the direct heir to the movement that Sanders built. But where Sanders was the gruff, grandfatherly professor, AOC is the charismatic, media-savvy leader. She has taken his ideas and translated them into the language of a new generation. She is now the undisputed figurehead of the Squad, a small but incredibly influential group of young, progressive members of Congress. Through her leadership and her massive public platform, she is actively cultivating the next wave of politicians who share her generational worldview. She is not just a political star, she is a movement builder, the center of a new political solar system that is pulling the entire Democratic Party into its orbit. This makes her not just a temporary phenomenon, but a figure of long-term, structural importance in the future of American politics.
Now you heard that AOC, among others, were arrested last night. She truly is an American hero. It was brutal, taken out in cuffs. Well, technically, her shirt had cuffs. Maybe French cuffs, as she did surrender without fighting. But if her pants had cuffs, she would have pretended to be in leg irons too. But real handcuffs, not so much. But that didn't stop her from pretending. And I hate it when people do this to me. When I ask people to put on handcuffs and they say, I'll just pretend I have them on, I'd be like, sure, and I'll pretend to pay you after.
The reaction to AOC from the political and media establishment has been a fascinating case study in bewilderment. The old guard of both parties seems to fundamentally misunderstand the source of her power. They see her policy proposals as naive and her communication style as undignified, and they cannot seem to grasp why she continues to be so popular and influential, particularly with young people. This is because they are judging her by an outdated set of political rules. They believe that power comes from seniority, from backroom deals, from carefully worded op-eds in legacy newspapers. They are trying to play chess while AOC is playing an entirely different game, one whose rules they don't understand.
Delivered in recyclable packaging.
And then there's the true radical left, who's gone beyond all the identity issues. I mean, don't get me wrong. The person I'm going to show you is 100% wrapped in all of them, but like genuinely believes the Hitler fascist stuff, like is distraught because they really think Hitler just got reelected. Most of them were just pretending, but then there are the ones who genuinely believe it, like AOC.
We are about to enter a political period that will have consequences for the rest of our lives. Donald Trump has talked about turning the military on U.S. citizens that he deems his domestic political enemies. Authoritarians and people that he affiliates closely with and strongmen abroad, in regimes like that, it is not uncommon to jail political dissidents or legislative opponents.
One of the most prominent Democrats in America.
They fail to see that her power comes not from traditional sources, but from her perceived authenticity and her direct connection to her millions of followers. She doesn't need the approval of a newspaper editorial board when she can speak directly to her base through an Instagram live session. She doesn't need the endorsement of an old guard party leader when she has an army of online supporters who will amplify her message. The backlash from the bewildered establishment often has the opposite of its intended effect. When they attack her, they are not just attacking a politician, they are attacking the voice of a generation. And in doing so, they only serve to strengthen her supporters' loyalty and reinforce their belief that she is an outsider fighting a corrupt system.
Smoke and ironic hashtags.
When he's talking, I'm picturing AOC lecturing us about our hamburgers, how we can't have them anymore, and we can't have heat in our homes, we can't have SUVs, and we can't, now the left wants us, we have to get rid of our gas stoves. It's a no. And so, they are very punitive. They want to control the way we live, of course, from their own private jets and mansions, which are, they're gas guzzling and energy guzzling by the minute. And he's feeling it. But I think this one goes beyond just the squad or leftist politicians.
At the heart of this generational conflict is a fundamental and perhaps irreconcilable collision of economic worldviews. This is the ultimate reality check. The policy platforms championed by AOC and her generation, a massive government-led mobilization to combat climate change, tuition-free college, universal health care, and a robust social safety net, would require a level of public spending and economic restructuring unseen in the United States since the original New Deal of the 1930s. The central question that mainstream economists and her older political opponents ask is a simple one: how do you pay for it? They argue that her proposals are economically illiterate, that they would lead to runaway inflation, crushing national debt, and the collapse of the private sector engine that drives the American economy. They are operating from within the rules and structures of the neoliberal economic consensus that has dominated the world for the past 40 years, an economy built by the baby boomer generation. However, AOC and her supporters would argue that this very economic system is the problem. They see it as a system that has exacerbated inequality, prioritized short-term corporate profits over long-term planetary health, and failed to deliver prosperity for their generation. They are not trying to work within the existing rules. They are trying to tear up the rulebook and write a new one. This is not just a debate over tax rates and budget deficits. It is a fundamental collision course between two vastly different conceptions of what an economy should be and who it should serve. In the final analysis, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is far more than just a single charismatic politician. She is the political embodiment of a massive, chaotic, and perhaps painful generational handoff. Her rise, her unique communication style, her radical policy priorities, and her confrontational attitude all represent the collected anxieties and ambitions of a new cohort that is poised to take the reins of power. She is the political avatar of a generation that feels it has been handed a world in crisis and is demanding revolutionary, not incremental change. The fierce, often vitriolic reaction she inspires from an older establishment is not just a reaction to her ideas. It is a reaction to this profound transfer of power and the loss of control it represents. This leads us to a final, crucial question about our collective future. Is this generational clash we are witnessing just a temporary, albeit chaotic, transition on the way to a new political consensus? Or does it represent a permanent and irreconcilable fracture in the American political landscape, a division so deep that it cannot be bridged? The answer will define the politics of the 21st century. The story of AOC is not just her story, it is the story of a nation grappling with its own identity in a moment of profound change. And we are all living through the turbulent, uncertain, and history-making consequences of her declaration of war on the world that was.